This is warm-up 1, pos neg. In Java, given two integer values, return true if one is negative and one is positive. Except if the parameter negative is true, then return true only if both are negative. So before we go on and explain the example cases, let's first reiterate what the problem statement says. Excuse me, okay. So the first case is if negative is false. Actually, before we do that, let's just say that the parameters we are given, there's three. There's integer a, integer b, and Boolean negative. And then this chart will map out the conditions with of which give us the result true. So actually, I'll just use a ruler. There. Okay. All right. So if the parameter negative is true, then we follow this case. If the parameter negative is true, then return true only if both are negative. So in this case, a equals is less than 0, and b is less than 0. Again, if both are negative and negative equals true, we return true as the sentence reads. Next, we have the case that if negative does not equal true, in other words, negative equals false, then we return true if one is negative and one is positive. So in this case, either a is positive and b is negative, or a is negative and b is positive. Note that because both of these conditions require the values to be positive or negative, we don't do equals to 0 because 0 is neither positive nor negative. So these are the mappings which result in a positive, or rather result in true. So let's go over the sample cases. So here we have 1, negative 1, and false. Because negative, the parameter negative is equal to false, we resort to this condition, these conditions. And you'll see that a is positive while b is negative, which means that it falls under this category, so we return true. Next, we have negative 1, 1, false. Again, negative equals false, so we look under these. In this case, a is negative while b is positive. Because it falls under that case, or rather it qualifies under the conditions, we return true. Next, we have the case negative 4, negative 5, true. In this case, we look at the conditions for if negative equals true. When negative equals true, we want a and b both to be negative. Of course, negative 4 and negative 5 are both negative, so we return true. So let's just implement this really quickly. So the first case, actually we'll first check if negative equals true. Next, we'll check if negative equals false. The reason why I'm splitting it up into these two families of conditions, if you will, is because the conditions that are required are different depending on the value of negative. So we'll just split it into those two cases. So when negative equals true, we'll see that a and b both have to be negative. If a and b are both negative, we return true. Otherwise, we return false. In this case, if negative equals false, we have a little more leeway. So a and b, one of them needs to be positive and one of them needs to be negative. So the first case is if a is positive and b is negative, then we return true. Otherwise, if a is negative and b is positive, we also return true. Finally, if none of these conditions are satisfied, but we are still under the umbrella of negative equals false, we have to return false. Again, we have to return false. If we run our solution, you'll see that it works. Or rather, It should work. Return, oh yeah, so I didn't specify an else clause, and according to CodingBet's compiler, it's saying that I need an else, and then catch all return. I'll actually just delete this like this, because we know that if negative does not equal true, then negative must equal false, and this must apply. Again, if we compile and rerun, we'll see that it's all correct.